The dark days of winter were lit with Domhnall's victory. That very night a feast was held in honor of the warriors, all warriors of the United Kingdoms, a land, Domhnall named as Alba. For this land was once united against the common foe of the Latins, who built the southern wall. The statement was heavy with expectation. All men of Alba knew Domhnall meant he wanted the lands to the wall, and that meant Bernicia, a huge chunk of Northumbria, including Bibbenberg's lands. And he had given power to the lords across the lands, a shrewd move. The warriors remained at Dunnottar for several weeks and the buoyancy of victory filled the whole place. Though not with her. While Osrith listened, as the king toasted those who had lost their lives for him, Osrith turned away, the yawning gap in her heart open and vulnerable. She had to crush her hope that he may be alive. She had even followed Oma back to the church that day, after saying it had helped with the dead. But all there had been was hot ash. Not even one dead body, not even a shape of one person who might have been tagged. Tagged, the mighty, beautiful, soulful warrior from Doia was dead and, Osrith had told herself mercilessly, she had better get used to the idea. Domhnall had met her off the field, informing her that King Domhnall wished to see her. Now, he had insisted, when Osrith tried to excuse herself to change. So she had stood before him, Constantine on his right, and had accepted her back, thanking her for her bravery and loyalty. He had suspected Grioghair was disloyal, he added, but hadn't been able to prove it. So she was at liberty, and accepted her as his true Gaelish warrior again. Osrith should have felt deep honor at his words, spoken in public this time, commending her as Gaelish. And, she did. But the palace, from which they had fled nearly 3 years before, Constantine insisting to his father she must go with him, was grey and empty, with the same pale light-inching darkness as felt her mood empty back again as dawn began. Some days Osrith did not feel like rising from her bed, back at the corner of the kitchen, at all. Even at the pinnacle of celebration, she had eaten at the feast, but the food tasted of nothing and she had crept away to the anesthesia of sleep. One night, a few days after the battle, Constantine cornered her, trying his utmost to guile her into his chamber, but she refused to go with him as he demanded, and pulled out tagged seeks when he tried to tongue her mouth. Osrith had then spent that night getting drunk with Fergus, quietly binging on ale and their newest pitha but that had simply made the next day awful, resulting in a severe headache and had thrown up for most of it. It was Domhnall who took her for a walk and had broken her of her mood by pushing her into the wellspring, telling her to drink all she could, laughing with her at her hangover. Osrith had been outraged, but then, as he'd offered his hand to pull her out, unable to stop laughing, Osrith's anger faded and she began to laugh too, looping her arm around his and pulling him in two. They then had walked many miles that day along the bank of the river, leaving Dunnottar and Culdees behind. Osrith wrapped in Domhnall's thick, woolen cloak as he carried hers, telling him of her refusal to marry Guthred and her escape with Eric Thurgilson. In the whole time I have known you, I have never known you to drink, Osrit, Domhnall had said. What has caused this melancholy? I lost a man I cared dearly for at the battle. But that was all she would confide. A skein of geese flew over Thm, latecomers from the north. Snow began to flit around them. You fought magnificently, Domhnall said. Flann was right, you are the correct owner of that sword. And I now have this. Osrith showed him tagged seeks, withdrawing it and allowing the diffused sunlight to melt over its blade. Domhnall said nothing, but put her hand over his as she sheathed it. You saved my life, did you know? Domhnall said, after they had walked a few more miles, to where the river bank curved and the Forth flooded into the sea. Osrith did not. The day had been a tumult of battle mind, of going with the throes of the day, responding to the changes to gain, little by little, for Domhnall. Remembering this had tipped her resolve. As they walked back towards Dunnottar, Osrith knew what she was to do. She could fight, and could not with a child. And that night, as Glimri went to his own rest, Osrith felt for the stone which she had once eased out, to hide her treasure in the underground spring. Hope had filled her chest, but reality grounded her. She had hidden it nearly 3 years before. It was unlikely to still be there. Yet, it was there. Her hand, delving through the cool water, found an uneven pile of stones and silt. Her fingers dug down, locating the fist-sized bag of silver that Sobrit had left for himself in the boat, in which Osrith herself had escaped. She removed it, and was glad water had flowed over it long enough that it was logged and the silver did not clink. It paid to be generous to the heathen, when she could slip away to see her, Bark, who had explained to her what monthly bleeding meant, and warned her to stay away from Constantine. Osrith had not listened, was needed by Osrith once more. She plunged her hand into the bag of silver, feeling the wet metal in her grasp. They were a strange sensation between her fingers, like grasping damp sand, or trailing her hands in the sea, as she had done when they left Alba for Caligulid. Would she still be alive, that healer? If not, someone else would be doing her job, for the adherents to the old Brittonic faith relied on a healer for everything from medicine to knowledge of the seasons, to sort out domestic disputes and to foretell omens of battle. As she felt the precious coins, clinking dully from moisture between her fingers, she closed her eyes and said a heathen promise to herself, closing the door of one life and opening the door on another. It always paid to respect the heathen no matter what the church or any king said, Osrith thought. For, she had used the lily root, yet still she had conceived. Perhaps Betha's supply of root was old, or Osrith had played it too weak. Replacing the bag under the stream bed minus a generous supply of silver, before sealing the stone from the low wall, Osrith promised herself that she would make sure that she always had a ready supply of root for the time when her own helping hand was not enough, and to never give her heart to anyone. And the next morning, Osrith began to do what Domhnall had said he wished for her, do what made her happy. And what made Osrith happy was to be a warrior, quick in thought and action. To be that again, she needed to visit the heathen, and to visit the heathen, she needed an excuse. She also had made a promise to her king to spy in Caligulid, so she went to find Fergus. He seemed surprised to see her, but continued his fight training with her, which Osrith knew Domhnall would be watching, and it wasn't long before the king came down to see her and asked her to walk with him. Osrith told the king what she had discovered in Caligulid, of the heathen loyalty still under a veneer of Christianity, and that there was a clear link between Eophilic and Wessex, for it was a priest from Alfred of Wessex who had sent word to Eophilic about the dream which had allowed Guthred to accede the throne. It reminds me of Strathclyde, Osrith said. The people, as I remember, before we went to Glashcu. We walked so far in their country. They were loyal to the night and say, "Be wind, the sun, the water." Domhnall let her finish as she gathered her thoughts. The people, those whose work supports the nobility, the church, they are still st. She looked up to Domhnall as they passed the same spring that his cousin had pushed her into a week before. The land, the people have not changed since the time of Arian, if not before. Should I be you, my king, I would encourage Eochaid to seek to reclaim the land on his southern border as you would seek the land of Bernicia to the wall. This is Northumbria territory, Domhnall replied. Osrith knew him well enough to know this was a game, to argue the opposing point so he could see everything. Surely I gain new enemies. Guthred's tenure is tentative. The blessed Oswald appeared to their former abbot in a dream. Yet it is very convenient how his rule of Northumbria fits politically with Wessex's interest in uniting kingdoms containing Angles and Saxons. It is said to be about opposing the threat of the Norse and Danes. Yes, Osrith, I do see, Domhnall acknowledged. And I am grateful for you telling me this. He stopped walking. The great feast of Candlemas was almost upon them and the weather had been somewhat mild. Likely, then, that snow would blanket the land before Lent. I am also sorry to hear of your loss. Tagd was very dear to me, as I understand, to you. Had I known you were hand, I would never have suggested your alliance to King Guthred. Domhnall smiled. It was mostly veneer. You knew it was the right words at the right time for him. But sometimes you just wanted the words, and Osrith needed them just now. And I would never have found out about Greogair without you having to have endured what you did. Osrith nodded, complicitly. He did know, she had seen his face at the close of the battle, it had shown a confirmation of his suspicions, not shock at betrayal. Had he known, and was merely using Greogair? Good for him, if so. It was the MQRK of a king to play all his hands to his advantage, like using the stone from Team Reach and placing at the trip point of the three kingdoms of Alba, like giving regional lords power over their local people, whose minuscule politics they knew and could preside over. And, what her king asked of her next, played very much to Osrith's own advantage. He asked her to cross to Chaldees for some days to collect information from the monks about Wessex,